Welcome back, everybody, to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. Thanks to Dr. Michael Fine. Sobering numbers from the Department of Health today on the spread of the coronavirus, specifically the Delta variant here in Rhode Island. But let's go down to the University of Virginia, Professor, Chair of the Political Science Department, Jennifer Lawless. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to join you.
There is so much political news. When I reached out to you to appear today, there was only a lot. Now there's like 10 times a lot of political news. Let's go to the great state, the Empire State of New York, and a blockbuster announcement this morning from the Attorney General. She's a very aggressive and very tough Attorney General. She went after the Sacklers and Purdue like no one else in the country did. She oversaw an investigation into the behavior of the governor, Andrew Cuomo, and came up with a blockbuster report with two very senior beyond reproach investigators. Your thoughts on that announcement today?
The report was as damning as it could possibly be. The report is 186 pages, so full disclosure, I read the executive summary and I skimmed the rest of the report. But generally speaking, the findings are that there are multiple women whose allegations were corroborated, who spoke to friends or texted people in real time as these allegations of sexual harassment were occurring. And those complaints were found to be credible across the board. We're talking about not only senior staffers in the administration, we're also talking about a state trooper, we're talking about people who worked outside of state government. And point by point, what these women have been able to demonstrate is that Andrew Cuomo used suggestive language, he touched them inappropriately, he created a hostile work environment. And frankly, the report indicates that Cuomo's defense is not credible, that in some cases he blamed the women, in some cases he denied behavior, which was well corroborated, and in others he basically just pled guilty, thinking that there was nothing wrong with what he did. So it's hard to see how he crawls out from this, and I wouldn't be surprised, given the credence that was allocated to these women, if we don't see more women now feel secure to come out as well.
That announcement took place 10 or 11 o'clock this morning. I was messaging you. We were watching it live on CNN. It was as hard-hitting as you ever see in these types of reports. But he's not taking these lying down. He is firing back and continuing on his narrative that these were politically motivated, they weren't inappropriate, they were friendly, they were taken out of context. How long can he continue to do that, and how long can his network of political supporters stick with him?
I don't think very long. I mean, I think at this point, the best that he can hope for is that he somehow is able to convince the state legislature not to impeach him and just let him finish his term. But, it seems like his political career is probably over. You don't have these kinds of allegations come about from multiple people, all of whom can be corroborated. They're not all lying. They're not all misinterpreting something. They're not all reading the tea leaves incorrectly. You did something wrong. And to suggest that it's a political witch hunt, I mean, that's a typical move that politicians make, but you're dealing with Democrats who are going to be trying to avoid party infighting when it comes time for the primary next year anyway. So there doesn't look to be a lot in the way of a broad sense of political motivation, unless he's talking about the Attorney General herself. But, I just think that is the kind of argument that's going to fall on deaf ears on the part of voters.
The Attorney General, which I thought was somewhat surprising, said there's no criminal charges coming from the state, but that there creates a platform for a lot of civil suits, but also open the door that all these women would have the opportunity to go out and file criminal complaints. And in one case, I believe in Albany, someone already has filed a complaint with the Albany Police Department, and there's an expectation probably with this report now that could move forward. Talk about the barrage of legal morass that he is about to enter into.
Oh, it's definitely not a dream come true as far as he's concerned. I mean, the important thing to keep in mind is that most of these allegations are relatively new. Several of them happened during COVID. I mean, one is from, or I shouldn't say they're allegations anymore, like they've been corroborated. One is from a physician who was giving him the COVID test on television, right? This is somebody that we've seen and that we are familiar with amid the pandemic. And so, because no statutes of limitations have expired, because these are fresh cases, because people were communicating in real time, there are going to likely be multiple lawsuits, both civil and criminal, that are pursued. And he's going to spend the next many years, trying to climb out of that legal morass. And, if he thinks his political career is not over, then that also increases the likelihood that he's going to continue to dig in his heels and not settle or not acknowledge that he did anything wrong. So, the final year and a half of his term, regardless of whether he's allowed to finish it, he's going to be highly distracted. And keep in mind, too, that the contract for these investigators was extended an additional 6 months because they're going to likely be working with the state assembly to provide additional information that the state assembly might need to move forward with impeachment. So, politically and personally, this is a very, very bad day for Andrew Cuomo.
Outgoing Mayor de Blasio has been a critic of his. They've butted heads numerous times. I believe he had already called for him to step down prior to this investigation. But the Chuck Schumers of the world and some of the other folks, do they start to pile on and say, you got to go? Whether it's initially like today, does Charles Schumer call Andrew Cuomo and say, you got to resign in the best interest of the Democratic Party in the state of New York?
I think so, especially because so many of these establishment Democrats had said, let's let the investigation play out. Let's see what the investigators find. Let's not assume that he's done anything wrong. Well, we now have 186 pages documenting point by point all of the things that he did that were completely unacceptable. And so all of the people that sort of punted and said, let's hold off and see what the investigators find are going to face a day of reckoning themselves. And Chuck Schumer is certainly on that list.
And does he, you forewarned that, hey, listen, the governor of Virginia escaped massive criticism and calls for his resignation when he allegedly had appeared in blackface prior to his political career. He survived. Bill Cosby had 60-odd women make allegations, was convicted and then overturned, really by a significant mistake by the prosecutors in that case. Does Andrew Cuomo say, hey, what's the harm of me running this thing out? If I quit, I prove the allegations. If I run this thing out for the rest of my tenure in office, maybe it's the jury split on me.
Certainly, he can do that. If he resigns, it's probably in the best interests of the state. It's in the best interests of the party. If he opts to move forward, it's hard to see sort of a satisfactory end for him. The difference between Andrew Cuomo and somebody like, Governor Ralph Northam in Virginia is that this is happening in real time. This wasn't something that you can say was in my past. This wasn't something that he's grown from. He's doing this amid the allegations of doing it. The other thing that I think is quite different was that Northam was term limited. He could run again in the future, but you can't serve 2 consecutive terms. And the third thing, and I think this is really important, is he was quite contrite. Once he admitted that it was in fact him in the photo in blackface, he said he did it, it was wrong, and he's trying to learn how to be a better person. Cuomo at no point has done that. And if there's anything that we know, it's that the American people are forgiving when you apologize. They're far less forgiving when you don't.
Impact to Chris Cuomo, who's got a complicated relationship with his brother and did some, Sunday kitchen cabinet calls on this issue with him. Does this take him down at CNN?
I think probably not, just because CNN was really careful about the extent to which Chris Cuomo was not permitted to comment on or cover any of the scandal. They were certainly buddy-buddy and, tried to provide some sort of comedy act during the early days of COVID. But, as soon as any allegations were surfaced, I think the network was very, very careful about trying to remove any perception of impropriety or mitigate any conflict of interest. We'll see, but it looks like the pieces were in place to avoid any major problems for Chris Cuomo.
This morning, GoLocal broke a story on Helena Folks, a very prominent businesswoman nationally and globally. She makes just about every top 100 women in business list known to mankind, Forbes, Fortune, et cetera, et cetera. She was the president of CVS, not the CEO, but was the president, and then got hired away to the Hudson Company, one of the biggest public corporations in Canada a few years ago. She only lasted 2 years. She's from a very rich political family. Her grandfather was a senator, and both famous and infamous, Thomas Dodd from Connecticut, and then her uncle, Chris Dodd, was a longtime senator as well. Her mother roomed with Nancy Pelosi in college at Trinity College outside of DC. She's got a pile of money. She may not have a lot of name recognition in Rhode Island. She's got a big network. She does look a little, for the lay person, like maybe Gina Raimondo 2.0. Your thoughts?
Well, so the best way to build name recognition is with money. And so, she's in a position where if she's interested in running for governor and she's interested in quickly sort of rising to the top of that potential candidate or candidate list, she has the resources to make that happen. The challenges are a couple. The first is that she does look like Gina Raimondo 2.0 in terms of her background. This is not to say that they're actually comparable, but you've got a business background, you're running as a Democrat, you're wealthy, you've been highly successful. The other issue is that she doesn't have much in the way of a political record. It's one thing to have a political family. It's another thing to demonstrate that you have some sort of political credentials yourself. Of course, Rhode Island has done well having business people as governor who don't have previous political experience. So given her own resources, given her name recognition, given her ability to build name recognition, and given the circles with which she clearly would be able to access political consultants and people who understand how to run for office in New England, I think she would be a very formidable candidate.
Let's jump over to Washington, D.C., what we were originally going to talk about. First, the infrastructure bill, which I have raised questions about the president's ability to get his #1 priority done. We're not there yet, so let's not jinx it per se, but where is he on getting an infrastructure bill done?
So it looks like it will happen. The Senate, which was the big challenge, has agreed to a $1 trillion bill in a bipartisan way. But that doesn't mean that anything's happening anytime soon, because the House isn't back in session for another 4 weeks. They have to vote on their own version of the bill. And during that time, there could be other issues that come up that once the two bills are reconciled and all of the members have to vote on this shared version, there are senators that could ultimately say, and you know what, things changed, I'm not going to get on board. So, this is a don't count your chickens before they hatch, but it was certainly a very, very important and necessary first step to move this forward. But even so, we're talking about at least another month from now before we see any legislation go to Joe Biden's desk.
Okay, and then the eviction legislation. This has been a series of policies by different federal agencies. I think the first set might have been, it's hard to remember, the last few delays in holding off the, I think it was FEMA were the first couple of eviction moratoriums. Then it shifted to the CDC. Then the Supreme Court ruled that you couldn't keep doing this on infinita. You needed legislative approval. The court kind of gave them an extra month that then expired on July 30th. The states have had piles and piles of money since Trump was in office. That money was authorized under the December agreement of stimulus money, distributed to the states in February. The states have been completely inept at distributing the money. Where are we now?
Oh, this is terrible. I mean, that you're in a major, you have a major problem when you're blaming the Supreme Court and your Congress or the president, right? Like nobody, it's crazy. So basically, we're in a position where I looked right before we got on the air. There are 8 states, mostly solidly blue states, whose state level eviction moratoriums still have not expired. So we're really talking about 32 other states where as of today, as of yesterday, that's it. And the states themselves have money that they could be giving to people as assistance that they haven't been. Joe Biden says that he and his White House does not have the authority to put into effect any kind of extension or to provide real guidance regarding the money that hasn't been spent because of the Supreme Court decision. Congress is saying that they were unaware of this until just a few days ago. They thought Biden was going to be the one handling it. But even if when Nancy Pelosi tried to move quickly, she didn't even have enough Democratic votes to extend the moratorium. So, this is a situation where you live is going to determine how bad off you are moving forward. And it's just really unfortunate that there's no coherent policy around this. My understanding is that both the CDC and the administration are trying to figure out if there are some ways for them to continue to guide how this money is spent. The reluctance on the part of the White House is that they don't want another fight at the Supreme Court that could ultimately further limit the executive branch's ability to intervene in public health crises. So they're walking on this tightrope because they want to extend the eviction moratorium, obviously, but they also don't want to tie their hands for the future.
Yeah, I mean, in Rhode Island received $200 million. They got it approved in December. As I mentioned, to date, they've spent 4% of the money. They've only gotten $8 million out on the street. We'd broken the story that about a month ago, that they only had $1.2 million out. The housing group, Rhode Island Housing, which is a quasi-state agency, promised that, oh, don't worry, in the next 30 days, we're going to have this money flowing. We're going to have 20, 30, 40, $50 million out the door. And in reality, they went from 1.2 to $8.1 million, just 4% of the $200 million. There are some federal deadlines in this, in which if you don't have certain monies out the door, you start losing the money. So it could be the worst of all worlds. Rhode Island's the second worst in New England, and pretty low. I mean, Mississippi's worse, and some of the southern states, but of the northeastern states, Rhode Island's at the bottom of the bucket.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, so there are various levels of incompetence across the board. The other thing is that a month ago, when it was clear that this was going to happen, the Delta variant was not surging the way that it was. There were not, shutdowns or mask mandates or vaccination mandates that are making it difficult for some people to function in various parts of the country. The political division regarding COVID, while still surging, seemed less important because it looked like an end was in sight. And now all of that's out the window. So, it's just the timing couldn't be any worse. And all of the branches of government kind of like throwing up their hands and saying, well, it's the other guy's fault, doesn't help people who can't afford to pay their rent. It doesn't help landlords who haven't been able to collect rent. And it doesn't help the states. It doesn't incentivize the states to actually move forward and distribute this money.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big mistakes I think that people are making is rents are surging. So there's this thought by public policy people that, oh, we'll get the landlords their money and then they'll be happy. A lot of landlords that we talk to off the record who don't want to be quoted are like, I want to get these people out. They didn't pay their rent. I can charge another 10 or 20% more once I clear this group out. And they've been the ones holding the bag for a year and even more so. They're done with this process. They are done with these tenants. They are done with government. I think that's the missing component of how badly both the federal and the state governments have handled this thing. So
yeah, and I think that the issue is that if the landlords were getting their money in a timely manner all along, they wouldn't be pitted against their tenants.
Yeah.
So, right. The incompetence and the slow pace by which these programs have been implemented, when they've been implemented at all, has created, I think, this false fight between the landlords and the tenants when actually both need help.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just wrap up with, where's the Biden legacy? Where's his administration? We're 8 months into his first year. First years are also, ever so important in the legacy of presidents. Where is he right now?
If the infrastructure bill passes, that'll obviously be a major win. I would have said a month ago that being able to bring to the end a global pandemic would have been what he was known for, but it hasn't happened yet, and it looks like we're moving in the wrong direction. So I don't know. I think it's still a little bit too soon to tell. What I do think is that some of the other domestic policy issues that were on the agenda are now again going to go to the bottom of the list, because even if the administration can walk and chew gum, they can't do 1,000 things at once, and COVID is back up there as the #1 issue they have to address.
Yeah, even in Rhode Island, 70% adults vaccinated. Cases are surging, hospitalizations are starting to climb up, lots of controversies, lots of complexities. Professor, thanks as always for joining us. Always appreciate you taking the time and so much today with so much going on. For everybody else, stay safe, stay tuned for more updates, and if you haven't gotten vaccinated, you're out of excuses. Get it going. Head over to a CVS or a Walgreens or any place you want to go, your primary care doctor, and get vaccinated. Thanks, everyone.